Welcome to Founders Marketing Compass. My name is Etgar Shpivak. With my experience as a co-founder and as a marketer, I'm interviewing founders and investors to learn how to build healthy, lasting relationships between startup founders and their marketing team. Today, I'm hosting Paul Knegten, the former CMO of Outbrain Beeswax that was acquired by Comcast, and a startup founder. Hi, Paul.
Hey, what's going on, Etgar? It's nice to be here.
Doing great, and thank you so much for taking the time for this podcast. I'm happy if you can tell me and the listeners a bit about yourself and about your journey.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I have a strong tie to Israel and the startup scene there. I mean, I really can trace the beginnings of my professional success back to being in Israel. I graduated college when I was 23 years old. First thing I did was get on a flight to Tel Aviv, and I kind of never came back. At least that's the story, the way my parents would see it. I wound up spending 5 years building a life and a career there. My first real job, not including teaching English and all the kinds of things that Anglos do when they move to Israel. My first real job was working for a biotech startup in business development, and I happened to have majored in biology in my undergraduate studies, so it kind of made sense. But the real reason they hired me was because I could speak English really well and I could write, and so that was kind of like the angle for a lot of the Anglo immigrants to Israel. And so I really owe that whole really exciting time and all that. I mean, if you remember, I think it was called Garage Geeks, was like just getting big then. It was like 2004, 2005, 2006.
They had the best events in Huron.
Yeah, well, maybe even in the whole Gush Dan area.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe Haifa had good ones too, but yeah, that was like, I think there was really no other place on the planet really that you could see that density of such like exciting things happening. Like I don't think maybe people in the startup scene today can fully appreciate just what that was like. But I had the privilege to be a part of that scene. I wound up working for, after the biotech startup, it's a great industry, but like you find out if the thing works after 10 years, it's a little bit too long of a cycle. I wound up working for an Israeli tech startup called Dapper. It was founded by two amazing people, Ilan Shir, who now is the CEO of, and founder of Nexar, Jonathan Eisen, who I wound up starting a company with after. And that company was this quirky Web 2.0 tool to move content around the web by just pointing and clicking on websites. I mean, this is back when there were websites that people went to. Not everything was an app. And so that pivoted into an ad company. I pivoted into a marketing role because that's what we needed. And I immersed myself in advertising technology, now called ad tech. And I was just like 28-year-old kid, just kind of like, okay, well, I must know everything about this. And I started a podcast and interviewed people. And that's how I got to know your friend, Yaron, who introduced us. Galai, who's obviously the founder of Outbrain and Quigo and just an amazing visionary. And so from there, we wound up getting acquired by Yahoo, spent some time there. I mean, it's kind of the minimum possible. And then I wound up being the VP marketing in a much bigger company called Media Math, and just kind of, forged my path in advertising tech, moved back to the US, started my own company in a completely different field, B2B SaaS, basically, selling to real estate agents. It was a product that helped people navigate the process of buying a house. So learned a tremendous lot there. We wound up raising a little over 20 million from Excel Partners and a few others. We recently sold that company this year. So it is going on, and tens of thousands of real estate agents use it. But like the through line, I guess, if we're trying to learn something from all this, like through line, I think of my marketing career at least, is like this notion of like you have to get people to care about you as a company or you as people on their way home from work. Now, I mean, you can imagine a time when people used to drive home from work or ride the bus home from work. Now, a lot of people in our industry work from home a lot of the time. But this like notion of like, how do I get them to care about us as people? How do I get us to resonate with them about their own lives and their own careers? Like, let's say they want a promotion. Let's say they want to get poached by a competitor. Like, how can we be responsible for that happening? How can we help make that happen? And so a lot of that manifested in like, instead of worrying about things like, well, how do we increase our percentage of lead conversion and how do we, generate more efficient fun? How do we get this person up on stage talking about the solutions to the industry that they sit in. How do we get their profile raised? How do we make them heroes? And I think that's really been like, how do we build a crusade? I've gotten some criticism throughout the years for using the word crusade for what it means in the Middle Ages of lots of people getting killed and trying to take back the Holy Land. But put that aside for a second. It's how do you build a movement? And I think that when you look at successful companies in enterprise B2B or B2B more generally, like I like to point at Salesforce.com, when you look at what they were able to do, they made the most boring thing, which is CRM software, super exciting for the first time. And they made it about a crusade against software that you install. And I think that just so many lessons to be learned from that. I owe my whole career and the successes that I've driven to that type of mentality. And that's kind of what I try to bring to CEOs. That's what I try to bring to companies I work for, is less about focusing on marketing as a math problem that needs solving and measuring, and more focusing on it like, how do we build a crusade around the thing that you're passionate about? How do we take that and turn it outward and get everybody as excited about it as you are? And I think that's really the key. So I don't know if I answered the question. I kind of meandered through some different topics.
I love it. And then I love the detail and mainly love the way that you point out your vision and your train of thought. And I think that in this conversation, I know that you gave a lot of interviews and you have your own podcast. And I want to talk about relationship between founders and board members to the marketing team from the point of view of you as the marketing person, as the marketing leader. And to get to the second side, as normally we have here the founders and the investors, and with your experience of being in 2 unicorns and to get this perspective from those enterprise companies. And I want to dive in with the first question to start with the KPI question that I'm starting every interview is to learn how do you translate those very high level metrics that you get from the board, you get from the founders into actionable KPI for your team? And what are the challenges that you face in aligning your marketing efforts with the overall business goals?
Yeah. That is both the most difficult to answer and most, I'd say, poorly explained or poorly understood question in marketing, especially B2B or enterprise marketing.
This is why we're having this podcast to try to address.
Because, but I think that's I'm not dodging the question. Yeah, I'm not dodging the question. I would say that is the most difficult thing for us to answer as practitioners, as an industry, as like a marketing function. I think it's the most important one that we should be discussing. It's the one that leads to that cliche about the CMO's tenure is like 18 months. I think this is one that has caused a lot of doubt in kind of like, well, does marketing really work? I think that it ranges the answer. So this is going to be somewhat of a long answer, but I promise I'll get to the point. It ranges from all the way to, I'll know it when I see it, kind of the put the finger in the air and which way the wind blows. The way I kind of like to illustrate that one when a CEO or a founder or anyone I'm talking to just really doesn't get it. It's like, does marketing even matter at all? I'll often ask them like, okay, well, if you walked into a sales meeting and you smelled really bad, how would that affect the outcome? And I can generally get them around to saying like, if we stink, that's not going to be good. Okay, but how do you measure that? Okay, that's the far end of the spectrum of we know it when we see it. We're doing influence operations. These things are inherently brain, these deal with the psychology of human beings. We're not always going to know what made them pick up the phone and call us or what made them fill out a form. Even if it has an attribution attached to it, that's going to often be bullshit. I mean, there is so much over attribution to the last action or most measurable action that empires are built and lost on that bullshit. I really don't like the full. So that's going to the whole other end of the spectrum, which is kind of like, we're going to make a machine and, every single touch point is going to get its own interaction. We're going to send this to this. We're going to micro-target and segment everything. And we're going to build this most complicated web of interactions that, you might call full funnel marketing and the whole life cycle. And it's like, okay, but what are we saying to them? Generally gets quite a bit less of an emphasis, but it's all measurable. Like, we're going to show you graphs that show, your lead volume going up, your MQLs and your SQLs and all this kind of stuff. And that's the far end of the other end of the spectrum. And at least in enterprise type companies, I often find that gets a lot of head scratches and shrugs from the CEO because, why isn't our revenue growing? Like, it works until it doesn't. I think it's necessary but insufficient and fails to tell anywhere near the full picture of the effectiveness of the marketing you're doing. So those are kind of the two extremes, is like, we'll just wing it and you'll know it when you see it. And we're going to measure every pixel firing everywhere, and we're going to attribute everything, and we're going to boil everything down to charts and graphs in practice. So those are the options in practice. What I generally see, let's talk about enterprise marketing first, because that's what I know the best. And then we can go down to more like self-service B2B SaaS, which I know quite a bit about, having founded a startup in it and struggling with it. To be honest with you, you learn a lot from things that you're not the best at, and I'll try to pass some of that on. But in practice, it comes down to, do you have a bond of sort of shared understanding with your CEO, with your board? Let's start with the CEO first, and then I think the board is a really interesting question too, because founders have to face their boards, and the board's going to ask questions about CAC to LTV that their marketing lead should be able to answer. But if you have, let's say, I'll tell you a short story. I'm friends with a CMO of a medium-sized public company that's very successful, and he's been with the company for a very long time. And I was having coffee with him, and I asked him about this sort of spectrum of like, okay, from we'll wing it, know when we see it, to measuring every touch point everywhere all the time. And he was like, Paul, we just acquired 3 other companies with all their own Salesforce instances, and some use HubSpot, some use these other things. Do you have any idea how hard it is for us to even know who owns a lead, let alone like what touch points they like? Paul, we're nowhere near able to do that. And I'm like, okay, you guys are doing really well. Like, first of all, how do you keep your job? And second of all, like, how do you know it's working? And he told me it's because my CEO is a sales guy. He believes in this stuff. He knows this stuff works. How does he know this stuff works? I don't know, but every time he's CEO of a company, he takes it from this level to this level and grows its revenue several times over. So he must be doing something right. I saw that at Freewheel. So I was when Beeswax got acquired by Comcast, we became part of a company called Freewheel, which is like they call it a supply side platform, I guess, which is like manage the supply of TV inventory for the type of TV you watch in streaming. And they're the biggest player in that space. And they're owned by this huge telco, so they have access to all that inventory and stuff. And we're not tracking every little pixel firing everywhere. So how do we do this? It's like, we know who to have golf with when. We know what that's got to feel like. When we have a huge activation at Cannes, we spend $1 million on. We know how to make people feel a certain way about us. And that CEO gets it. And it's like, so I think it's a little bit of a dodge to say on the far left end of the spectrum of, we know it when we see it. But that's kind of how they're measuring it. That's kind of how these highly successful companies are growing. And so, I've run into other CEOs that are a little more skeptical of that. And, what you walk them around Cannes or your CES or something, you're like, hey, look at that. And they're just like, God, they're just lighting money on fire. And sometimes they'll be like, do you think they're stupid? Do you think that's why they're doing it? Or do you think it's because they're doing, $1 billion in revenue with high margins, and they know what they're doing? They know exactly how to make their potential customers feel. They know who they are. They're good at taking a big list and turning it into a small list and focusing on those people with the right message at the right time. I don't know. They measure things a lot more vibes based than I think we are prepared for. Boards is, I think, that's kind of another beast. I mean, we're talking about mature companies here doing huge marketing programs that cost millions of dollars. Now let's shift focus to, you got a startup, you raised a Series B, let's say, and you brought on an investor. So this is from actual experience. So when I was at Beeswax, RE Ventures was on our board. They were one of our investors. They were awesome. They invest in SaaS companies. They thought they were investing in a SaaS company. I mean, Beeswax, superficially, I think, was a SaaS company. We were what's called a demand-side platform. So we're the portal through which people buy programmatic inventory on the internet. It was a lot of that other stuff, CTV, the streaming stuff, a lot of that. And what we would do, instead of charging the way that a lot of other DSPs charge, which is a percentage of your spend, this was like, you're going to own your own DSP. And you're only going to pay for essentially the compute. I mean, there's another word for it, but it was like the actual, operating expenses of bidding and everything. It's going to be almost like a flat fee. And so it was nominally a SaaS company. But the kind of customers we were selling to, I mean, yeah, they were buying it through SaaS, but it was still the same kind of dynamics of an enterprise sale. That was like, some contracts are going to be $150,000 and some contracts are going to be $1.5 million. But that investor invested in a SaaS company. So what they wanted to know was, what's your LTV to CAC? How does that look? And so my CEO, Ari, who's awesome, would, and is a marketer at heart and was the kind of person, by the way, who he knows it when he sees it. He's the CEO of Marketecture now, which is a really awesome podcast. And, he would come to me. So my board wants to see these unit economics. And having run a startup and having a board and all that kind of stuff, I knew really well, like how to calculate those. But it was like, I kind of came back with some numbers for him, but it was like, look, man, the variance here, like what LTV is so all across the map. I don't think there's anything meaningful to tell them here. Like what they're looking to understand, like it's really important to understand, like, why does your board want to know this? They want to know what your unit economics are because they are investors that put money into a machine. They expect to print more money at a certain multiple. So if they see unit economics that is a LTV to cap greater than X, let's call it X1. Okay, yeah, all right, so we should be deploying more capital against this. You found a machine. Like I think a lot of their brains have been burned out by like how successful companies like Facebook were at doing this. I think this is much harder to find now, which is why you're seeing venture investments go down and exits go down and things like that. But they were looking at us to understand, okay, how are we deploying our capital in you? Have you figured out a model that you can scale? Because that's all we care about, is you scaling from where you are now to a multiple of the valuation that we invested in. So they want to know from me, the CMO, what is that ratio, such that they can then authorize a budget that leans into that ratio. Whereas in enterprise marketing, it's not really about LTV to CAC, because those two things, unless you really just, you've done it so long, you have such good metrics, you can really nail down what that LTV is. It's such a moving target. And it's I don't know if that's really the way to measure return on marketing investment in a type of company where it's like, we could have one deal this month that's going to make our entire year. It's a little scrappier than that. You got to look at other things. So I touched on a couple things there. I think really the bottom line is, if you're going to survive, you're going to have a good tenure and be successful in those roles, you really got to make sure you're on the same page with your CEO and your board in terms of what good looks like. If they're convinced that good only is good if it's a greater than 1.5 LTV to CAC that you can demonstrate and lean into, and you have a marketing machine that essentially runs on autopilot, and then that's what you have to deliver. That's what you sold them. If it's more that, look, we don't care how you do it, you got to grow revenue, you got to sign bigger deals, you got to help sales be more successful. That's a different set of marching orders. But it all really does boil down to trust. It's this guy who I was having coffee with has a relationship of trust with his CEO that he's had across a couple of companies he's worked for him at. And there's no metric that's going to change that relationship of trust. They know when each other is doing a good job. And that's an underrated and unmeasurable quantity.
I just love it. I'm a huge believer in building this trust, both internally between the different stakeholders, and more important, to come every morning and to ask what we can do to build trust with our clients. Because I believe trust is the largest revenue generator for the long run. Because when people trust you, even if you fail sometimes, if they trust you and you know that you're going to deliver them over time, they will keep buying from you and they will recommend you because they will feel comfortable with this.
They'll ignore product problems. They'll ignore deficiencies, and they'll impute unknowns as good things. Every time I've been successful, it's been because we were able to sell a vision of where the company was going to be rather than just what the company does now. And in enterprise sales conversations, that is often the difference. Is we're going to work with you guys because I think you guys are onto something, not because I think your product is any good right now. I think it sucks right now. But you guys have technology that I know can go somewhere, and I want to have a hand in shaping. I mean, that's the classic early adopter, right? But that can be everything.
I agree on that. So for the next question is to elaborate, if you want, from your own experience or from others, about these relationships between the CMO to the CEO, the co-founder. Where is the boundaries of this is the CEO responsibility and this is the CMO responsibility? Because when we're talking about the classic marketing, the 4 Ps, it's about the product, it's about the pricing, it's about the promotion, which people think, only the promotion is the marketing. No, the marketing is way wider than only run those Google ads, Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, or making conferences or whatever. And in many cases, it's not clear who is in charge on all this marketing aspect. How do you see it from your point of view when you're coming to report on these relationships?
So I have a belief, and it's not, I mean, I think it's widely held among my peers as marketers, but not nearly as widely held among CEOs as it should be, or founders as it should be, which is nobody wants to hear what I have to say. Like on your podcast, maybe, because we're talking to, this is a little of a meta conversation about it all. But when it comes down to it, founders are exciting. Founders are fun. Founders are provocative. Founders are fucking building something. We're not building something. We're helping other people understand what we're building. But let's be honest, like we don't exist without the work the founder's doing, without the passion. And there is very rarely anybody more passionate about what they're building than the founder, because they have to be, otherwise they would never do what they're doing. They'd be an insane person. So I'm a firm believer in get them out there. Like, if you have two co-founders, one of them's got a personality, one of them doesn't. Okay, well, that's an easy conversation. I very often find to be the case that neither of them want to do anything about it. They really are like, well, you're the marketing person, you should go do that. It's like they don't want to hear from the minister of propaganda, my friends. They want to. I don't know if they even want to hear from you as the founder, but it is our burden and our job to get them to want to meet with you, and at least you ought to do the bare minimum of being willing to do that. I don't think that hiring a PR firm makes any sense for most early stage companies because, number one, it's expensive and you probably don't have a whole heck of a lot to say. You don't have a lot of success to point to yet. Raising a fundraising round, you contact TechCrunch yourself. And leading to that, secondly, you, founder, should be building relationships with reporters. They want to hear from you. You're a subject matter expert on something. Otherwise, why are you here? They want to know what you think of things. That doesn't mean they're going to write a story about you. But, hey, can you help me understand this, anything you can do to be on their distribution list of people they hit up to ask what's going on about something? That's part of your job, buddy. Like, you need to be good at that. And as a marketing person, we need to help you be good at that. So I think when it comes to, you break down the piece, that's a good way to look at it. I kind of like to look at the world as a dichotomy of there are story problems and there are problems. Marketing can help solve story problems. It can advise on problems, but those are things like our product sucks. Our market is not interested in the thing we're selling. That could be something like, hey, we're running out of money. It could be, we can't hire the right customer support people, so we're screwing people over. Those aren't story problems. Those are real problems that you need to solve without a marketing lens on them necessarily. But let's go back to the marketing. Story problems are things that, like, if we talked better about how we do things, if we focused our message, if we were in the right places, if we're more places than we are now, and I know there's a lot of Israeli startups like this, if we're loud and out there a lot, I mean, that's a big part of a lot of the success of Israeli companies that I've worked with is like their ability to just take over conversation. Those are all story problems that could be solved with marketing. So as it pertains to the founder, like what their responsibilities are, I've talked about one, which is like they ought to be the mouthpiece. And if you close your eyes and think about really successful companies, it is the founder that you remember. That being out there doing interviews, for better or worse, by the way, like they have to be there in good times and bad, but it is not ever. Like, close your eyes and try to think of a B2B SaaS CMO you remember. It's hard, and that's fine. Like, I'm fine with that personally. I'm more of a behind the scenes person, but that's number one. Number two, going back to trust, how do you build that has to do with responsibilities on things like, hey, there's this big conference and we're leaning really heavily into an activation there. We're going to try to get a lot of buzz. We're going to try to meet a lot of people. It's going to be exciting. That excitement is immeasurable. Doesn't show up on a report. I've tried many times to do these decks where you come back and you show people, and it always feels really weird and stilted. And like, okay, so we spent how much money on this? But I've had plenty of experiences where then the CEO was with me during those things, and they get it. I was talking to a really good friend of mine, Alon Maimoni, and he taught me a lot about this. He was running marketing for a very like developer focused company. And he had a CEO that, was a developer. And it's not often obvious to people who work with technology day in and day out that deal in the world of largely math problems and logic problems to be able to like quantify the impact of that kind of feeling. But, he was telling me, but when you take them there and you show them and they experience it, it's a far different level of trust that you can build with that person. Because they get it. Like they suddenly, it pierces that bubble of math into, okay, we're human beings that make decisions like human beings do. Now I get it. It takes us back to our sort of primal selves. So I think it's the founder's responsibility to show up at those things. That's not a sales and marketing thing. That's a company thing. That's a who we are and what we believe thing. if we're all excited about this thing and we show that outwardly, others are going to get excited about it too. And moreover, if the whole company is seeing the founder pitching in a conference, in a booth where to 5 people, at a huge conference hall, nobody cares about us, but they're out there doing that. That just says a lot more internally than it even does externally. So I think that's a huge responsibility that I sometimes see founders try to get out of. It's just that like showing up and being there for the marketing team. Now, there's a third one, which is like, I think my marketing colleagues won't like me saying this, but it's true. Part of the marketing team too. Like, I know there's this problem, which is everyone's a marketer. So when things are challenging, even when things aren't, like they're going to come in with the most annoying ideas you've ever heard. And you're going to have to find a way to like try them. Like it is your responsibility to listen to what they have to say and like give it a shot. Because you definitely, and I've learned this in my career the hard way, you do not want to be the person who says no to everything. Even if you know these things aren't going to work, if it's a tough time, and we had plenty of tough times at my startup, for instance, where I learned a lot of these more and more difficult lessons, like you gotta say yes to some things, and you gotta find a way to spin them. And by the way, they may be good ideas that with your insight as a CMO or whatever head of marketing, that you'll be able to turn into better ideas, or they may just be stupid ideas, and you have to find a way to do it so it's not going to damage anything and that you can learn something from it. But I think that helping them understand that their ideas are welcome and they're part of a team and that we're going to listen to them, I think does help build that trust as well. But that's, I think, I don't know, did I miss anything? You certainly poke at that. Like, did I miss any responsibilities of founders that you would add to that or take away?
I love it. I think that according to what I have seen in many cases, setting those boundaries in the beginning of the engagement is critical for this success of the startup. And, taking everything that you said now, and when the CMO come to the CEO or vice versa, this is what you need to do. You need to take me as a founder and to help me with our story problem and our distribution problems. And I need to take care of the rest. But the way that we build a narrative is ours, and the narrative goes into the product, into the way that we price ourselves. If, we're making this back and forth between what actually happened to this theory, these 4 Ps. So I think it's everything aligned and everything combined, and I love this answer. And jumping on to the next question is, can you discuss a time when a marketing campaign didn't go as planned? What did you learn from this? How did you communicate it into the founders and the board members?
So I'll go back to my startup, I think is the best example of that, because there was an interesting situation where we had something that was working really, really well. We had an ongoing campaign that was just crushing it. We were acquiring customers from nothing. And I'll be honest about how we were doing it. We were just emailing the heck out of every real estate agent whose email we can get a hold of. And good news, they're all on the internet. This was a wonderful setup for a scrappy startup that wants to do some growth hacking. And I think one of the big lessons there is things like that work until they don't. I mean, Google is a very smart company, and they know people don't want to get email all the time from companies that they didn't ask for it from. And so with algorithmic changes and things like that, you got to know when something stops working. And the good times, whatever that, and that's the thing about growth hacking, by the way, is that it's really cool when you figure out some sort of loophole, some sort of hack, some sort of like way to win without spending any money. And it's just like, those are rare epiphanies, and they, rare when they work. But be careful of getting too comfortable with them. I think that I could have done in that situation a much better job of using that stream of inbound signups, users converted into, it was a great channel. I think that being like blank check, then that helps us build more durable channels. I think I could have done a better job of building that insulation around it. It felt like, okay, well, this is how we're doing. Like everything we do should be around how do we maximize and just throttle as hard as we can forward this channel. Now, I don't know that this is rewriting history, so who knows, maybe that wouldn't have added much to it. But I think like using success to buy yourself time is something that is a lesson that I'd impart upon other CMOs, is that when you find something that works, awesome. Now you've got something you can always tell your CEO that's working, while you now can experiment with a bunch of other stuff to just build more channels. Like, great, you found one, move on to the next. Now, it's situation dependent. Sometimes these channels you find that work, like you really do require all hands on deck to make them work. But If you find something relatively cheap and easy, the way that we did there, which is just like, hey, MailChimp, just email them all. Use that as a way to buy yourself the ability to try more risky things. It's hard to try risky things when you got nothing, when there's no points on the board, you haven't proven yourself yet. You just sound like somebody who's not focused. But when you have some moderate success, I think that's a good time to start experimenting, to start, again, asking the founder, so what do you think? Like, what we've got this thing that's working, but I think we should, run a workshop with your founder and the executive team of like, what are things that you're seeing other companies doing that we're not doing? That's when you've built the credibility and you have the latitude to be able to just take the chip off your shoulder and be open to trying anything. I think that's a valuable thing to do. And by the way, its own lesson, that what I just said about workshops, just total aside, but because everyone's a marketer, learn how to run freaking workshops, because that will enable you to collect people's ideas and feedback and organize them in a way that makes very clear to them which ones are likely to hit the goal versus ease of execution or whatever 2x2 type of decision scheme you impose on it. And it makes everyone feel heard, and these things don't just keep coming up. But anyway, that's an aside. That's, I think, I don't know if it was a campaign that was unsuccessful, because don't think since then, I mean, there have been times it's like, okay, well, let's try this, and it's more tactical. Like, we have a bunch of people who've bought X from us. Let's see if we can sell them Y. And sometimes that'll work and sometimes that won't work. And that's sometimes more dependent on what X and Y are than it really is about whether the campaign was successful. It can depend on how old are these customers of ours and when's the last time they've heard from us. If it's been a year and a half, they may not remember who we are, and that thing's going right into spam. So there's tactical reasons why things don't work. Get good. So the first lesson is get good at, find something that works, put that, on autopilot as much as you can to focus on some things that you can try that are more risky. But the second thing is be really relentless in figuring out, okay, well, that didn't work, but what will? Like, I think that you'll get more latitude with your CEO if you're very honest and transparent and quick about, no, this isn't doing what I wanted it to. Don't try to make graphs that go up and to the right just to make graphs and go up to the right. They will see through that after the first couple of times you do that, because it is possible. In measuring just on lead gen, you can always get graphs that go up and to the right if you know what you're doing. Will that translate to customers and business? Completely different question. But get good at saying, okay, well, it's 2 weeks in. I don't know if this is working, so here's the 3 things we're going to do to change it. I mean, it's not as good as saying, hey, this is working and we're generating revenue, but I think they really need to see that responsiveness and intellectual honesty, that you're on top of it. It's better.
So, and I will say in this podcast, and I'm interviewing like founders and investors, and something that I've seen repeatedly coming from the founders and their CMO is that they believe that they need to choose the CMO that fit to the company stage. You have like the CMO for the seed stage, and then for the A stage, and then for the B, and so on. They didn't say it about their CTO or the CFO or about the other founders. At least most of them. One did say it. And from the CMO perspective, was in companies in different stages. What is your perspective on this?
So my perspective is there's probably no reason why you need a C-level marketing person, seed stage, A-round stage even, unless they're one of the founders and they need a C-level title because they're one of the founders. Like I was in that situation in my startup. I think that it's less about you need a CMO for seed and a CMO for, it's that you're less likely to find somebody. Like I could go work for a seed stage company. I'd probably be way too expensive as a full-time CMO. Now I advise companies these days, so they wind up getting benefit out of me through that for a lot less money and a lot of the same upside. But if I was advising that seed stage founder, what I would say is find someone super scrappy, and sometimes they're young, sometimes they're not. Don't just pick on that. Like that's not a good way to do it, because there's plenty of older folks that are super scrappy and they just don't necessarily want to be C-level. But I would find somebody who is more of a generalist. There's a term in Hebrew, maybe it's Yiddish, kolboinik. Like maybe they're not even a marketer by training. Maybe they're just good at hyping things and promoting things. Maybe they're in business school and that's what they're focusing on, and they have to prove themselves. Like it's a very underrated quality of like somebody who just really wants to prove themselves and get to that next level. When you find a CMO, especially if they've had a couple exits or they're later in their career, they don't have a whole heck of a lot to prove to you. I mean, that's for better or worse. Like, it's just, they don't need this as much as perhaps you need them. And that is not the greatest situation for a startup to be in. You want a group of people who this is where they want to make their career. Like, this is the thing that's going to, I mean, quite frankly, that's how I felt when I was at Dapper. That was my first real marketing job. And God damn it, like, I was going to do anything to stand out. And there was going to be no question about whether I was good at this. I think as people go through their careers, they have less of a need to do that. So I would advise any seeds, if I saw a seed stage saying we need a good CMO, I'd be like, no, you don't. Like, maybe, okay, if what you're lacking is the strategic advice, go get some advisors that'll help you. You know, at your seed stage, you probably don't have to pay them anything. Maybe you'll give them a little bit of equity and learn how to use them, you know, whether it's a weekly meeting or something, but you can get the strategic advice from them and introduce them to your scrappy marketing person, please, because they're not, look, they're going to tell you a bunch of stuff, and then you're going to play the telephone game. You're going to tell your marketing person that marketing person is going to be like, wait, why? Like, they're not going to know who this person is. Probably not going to like it. They're going to resent that person, as opposed to, hey, you know, I got the CMO of whatever to be on our advisory board, and he wants to meet with you once a week and mentor you. How awesome is that? Like, that's huge, because if that person builds a good, now, first of all, if that relationship doesn't work because your marketing person sucks, well, great news. Now you have validation to get rid of that person. If it does work, and now you've got this mentor-mentee relationship, they've now taken off your shoulders a big part of what a CEO needs to do, which is mentor people. Because if you don't know Mark, you're not going to know what it's going to take to bring that person up to the next level. So I would say find someone super scrappy, find a group of advisors that'll help you, and be relentless with them. Like, when they say they're willing to help, like, don't be nervous. Like, they really do probably mean it. And then introduce them to your marketing lead and try to get some cadence going on with them so that they can lift that person. Hey, did you think about this? Hey, what kind of campaigns are you running for this? Like, have you ever thought of that'll give them a lot more confidence to try things. Now, later on in different stages, I mean, there is a certain stage that a company really ought to get a CMO. And that stage that I described, I have a newsletter that I'm sure we can put in the show notes and link or something. But if you're in a situation where the decisions that the company is making would really benefit from having a marketing lens in the room, you really need to have a CMO. Like, you can't have just a VP marketing, because then they're not in that conversation. They don't have a seat at the table. The seat at the table is not for that person. It is so the company oftentimes cannot make stupid choices that a marketing person would have seen coming a mile away. Like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this thing that our customers don't like. Or like, hey, this thing that we keep doing that people in press keep writing about us doing, that sucks. Like, why do we keep doing that? Like, you know, half of our job, and I joke about this sometimes, but half of our job is sit in executive team meetings and say, wait, what? And you can't do that when you only have a VP marketing or a director of marketing. So I guess it's when, like, the company becomes more formal and makes decisions in an executive team setting that you need somebody who is at that level and that can build credibility with the other executives such that they don't go around. So the marketing person will impose a lot of structure around how we're going to talk about this business. And if they have clout and they have some ability to influence the rest of the people, they'll go along with it because they've bought into it. They've been brought along. But if that person is not a senior person, those more senior people they're going to go through what they want to do. Like, they're going to listen to what hey, I'm friends with the CMO at some other company. You asked us why we're not doing this, so I'm going to start doing it. You just run into problems like that. And then it's a never-ending cycle of, it's like, well, they're not listening, and well, you're not helping. So I think the point, if you're curious about when is the time to graduate from, I've got this really scrappy tactician who is great at getting shit done, and they're driving a lot of value, and they're an MVP, to and maybe it's them that you want to promote to that level, but to, I need someone strategic that can help us shape the story of this company and the growth of this company and help us make better decisions on what to do as a company. That's when you got to put a C in front of that name if they're in a room with a bunch of C's in front of that name.
Wow, I just love this answer. Very, very detailed, and I'm sure it's going to help lots of people. As you know, there is a lot of discussion, when do you need this CMO or this, practitioner, this Kolboynik. And so trying to get into more like into the weeds of asking from you as a CMO, what are the top 3 qualities that you look for when you hire your marketing team members?
Yeah. Obviously, it differs by role. For instance, there is maybe an unsung hero of many marketing teams, which is the head of marketing operations. Sometimes they're called like head of strategy and operations or VP strategy and ops, VP operations. When you get to a certain scale, marketing is a lot of independent projects going on at the same time, especially when you're global. You literally have like country managers that are relying on a marketing person or people in that country to do highly specialized work. And that, if you think about that on a spreadsheet, and every day stuff's happening if you're doing a good job, and press is happening, and releases are happening, and everything's happening, and events and this and that, and then planning out the year in advance. It's logistics. It's logistics. It's so much logistics. And when it's not done right, you have lots of failures across the board where, your CEO shows up at an event and our booth looks like shit or something. That'll get back to you, and there's something broken in the chain. Or it's just the never ending, we need more resources, we need more heads, we need to hire more people here, we need to hire more people there, we need 50 product marketing people. Like, how does that happen? Bad operations management, bad prioritization, bad, force ranking of what we're doing on a Monday.com board or whatever it is going to be, where it's like, here are the trains, here's where they're running, here's the efficiency, here's what's happening. That is a critical role, and the person you need for that role does not need to know anything about marketing. I'll be honest with you. They need to know how to run. They're a chief of staff kind of thing. And it makes it sound hoity, like, oh, you're a chief of staff, what are you, the president? Like, no, it's just, they're an operations person. They're there to help things run. For some reason, people understand why those roles are necessary in product. CEOs understand why those roles are necessary for the company or for finance or something. But they always sort of, I don't know. I think they don't understand the complexity of running all those programs at the same time and having somebody who is a senior person who reports to the CMO that is in charge of that. But any scaled org I've ever been at has had a very like a VP level at that role. So that's one. Let's put that aside. What do I look for in hiring marketing people more generally? Well, I'm more of the right brain kind of thinker, I guess. So that biases my thinking. I don't look for a copy of me, but at the same time, like, why am I good at what I do? I've been a musician my whole life. I played drums since I was 10 years old. I cook all the time. Like, I'm right around broadcasting from a studio control room that I play in all the time. Like, it's no accident. Like, this is the creativity, the taste thing. Being able to understand how people are going to feel about something if you do it or if you don't do it, how a constituency is going to receive a message. Those are not really teachable. Those are, you have it or you don't. And some people, they're very good at, like, okay, I can predict 5 chess moves away how this is going to play out. And those are the people you want on your team, because those are the people who are going to be able to understand how we should be talking about ourselves and what message is right. They're going to be able to listen to the customers in a way and have that empathy for the customers in a way that somebody who doesn't have that just isn't going to be able to. I think that curiosity and really trying to understand, why do they not, they're not buying it. Okay, why aren't they buying it? What are they buying? Why don't they like us? What don't they like about us? What do they think about us? Like, if they're not asking those questions and they're saying, what kind of marketing programs should we do? You're going to be spending a lot of time just telling them what to do. Like, I just think that kind of tendency or the curiosity of really understanding what the situation with the vibes around things are, like, it's hard to describe, but you kind of know it when you see it. I mean, being able to just, like, most marketing folks I know, maybe it's just changed more recently, but do not come from a background of doing customer interviews in enterprise marketing. It's hard to do them, to be honest with you. Like, it's like, hey, we're pitching Samsung, right? And for you to be like, hey, I would like to do some user interviews with Samsung. They're like, fuck off. Like, if we could talk to them, we would. Number one. Number two, we got this big pitch coming. So it's like the aggressiveness of being able to say, I don't understand how they're feeling until I actually get to talk to them. Some of them can build that from listening to sales calls too, but you got to have folks that are curious about what goes into that person's decision to buy us or not buy us, and how can I best understand that, and then how do I tap into that? I think that if you're going to hire a product marketer, that's tantamount. You need that. A lot of people think the product marketer's got to be the really technical one. Yeah, they need to know how to go toe to toe with the product managers too, or the designers too, or the engineers. But they're your last line of defense of shipping bullshit to people that they didn't want, but that your CEO thought would be neat. So they really got to understand, what does that voice of the customer say? If you're hiring event people, like, the event, I think it was Mark Benioff that said, like, the event is the message. I mean, that's a Marshall McLuhan thing. The medium is the message. How you build that, what it is that the event is. For instance, like when I was at Dapper, we had an event series called Fixing Advertising. It wasn't called Dapper. Like, no one gave a shit about who Dapper was. We were this little, Web 2.0 startup that had made dynamic ads, maybe based in Israel. Nobody ever heard of, we had like 20 people. But people were really upset with, or they were frustrated with how display ads didn't work. Like this just was this thing where measuring CTR, and we know this is all BS. So we launched this thing called fixing advertising that we could then bring people working at agencies and at brands who were the fixers and shine a spotlight on them and make it about them and all the great things they're doing. The event was the message in that particular case. But that could only come from understanding these people are frustrated about the industry that they serve. They don't like going to work every day and making crappy banner ads. So let's call that out. Let's make that a thing. So I think when you're hiring marketing people, you should hire people. I mean, look for, there's no such thing as an undergraduate marketing degree generally. So, I mean, maybe there is at certain universities, but I don't know. I think someone's got an English degree, someone who's got an art degree, someone who's got a, sociology, psychology. Look for somebody who's really good at understanding people and has a lot of empathy. And I don't know quite how you measure that, but hope you know it when you see it and when you talk to, you certainly know it when you don't see it. There are friends of ours that we love dearly that have no idea how people are going to feel about something until they do it. But we also have friends who know how to calculate that and know how to just look 5 steps ahead. How's that person going to feel? Those are your marketers and whatever kind of role that they're good at. There's data and analytics people you got to hire. They got to be good at math. I don't know. They're all better when they know which questions to ask, what to measure. The biggest mistake you can make is hiring a non-marketer or somebody who doesn't get marketing to be your data and analytics person, because they're not going to know where to look for the trends that they should be surfacing to you, the interesting data stories that you could tell externally, or they should just help you understand whether what you're doing is working in some way. So I don't know. I would do that. Or there's personality tests. I don't know if I believe in them, but you kind of know them when you see them.
I think this is perfect. I love it with talking about this understanding of people and this understanding of clients. And this is something that I talk a lot with my current clients, and I talk a lot as a marketer and as a founder on this constant understanding of what are the client's pains and not what are the feature that I'm selling, because no one cares about those features.
If I could add one more thing to it, I think it's the most important thing out of that. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because one of the best things you can do as a marketing person is the thing that might get you fired, which is be relentless about no. Great strategy is saying no. I said earlier, you don't want to say no to everything because that'll get you fired. It's true. But I think the biggest mistake I see companies make, I'd say 9 out of 10 times when companies fail, it's because they confused what they want their customers to want with what their customers actually want. And I think Steve Jobs, screwed up a lot of people's brains into thinking that customers don't know what they want, and you need to figure it. You need to just not listen to them. Every time I hear a founder tell me, if they'd listened to customers, Henry Ford would have built a faster horse, I want to go crazy, because nobody ever said that you need to build what your customers tell you to build or what your customers ask for. What we're saying here is you need to build what your customers want or what your customers need. Now, it is your job as a company to figure out what that is. That one way to figure out is to ask them, and you'll get an answer. And if you don't have a good marketing ear, whether that's a marketing person or whether you as a CEO, and it's early stage enough, maybe you're still figuring out what to build. If you can listen to that and unpack it, if they say, I'd really just like a faster horse, that's not the end of the journey. The question is, okay, why? Let's think. Why are they asking? Why do they want a faster horse? So you can ask them. So why do you want a faster horse? Because it'll get me to where I'm going faster. I'll be there on time. What if it wasn't a horse? I don't give a shit what it is. It's just a mule, whatever. Rocket ship. Just get me there. Well, now we figure something out. They want to get where they're going faster. How do we get where they're going faster? Now, Henry Ford wasn't an idiot. He wasn't deciding between a faster horse and the analogy breaks down there. But it's really important for you to be able to say, guys, I know you really want to move into this adjacent space. You really, really, really want to sell this new product. The reason why you're not selling it is not a story problem. It is a problem. And it is because they don't want to buy it. And this is why they don't want to buy it. And this is why no matter how hard we market it to them, they're not going to buy it. And that we are wasting our time and our resources trying to make this happen. Boards try to do that to companies constantly. You cannot listen to them. They will send you every competitor's press release about some new thing that they're doing in some adjacent space that now just tripled their TAM, and they're going to bake that into their next round's valuation. And you need to be able to not give a shit about any of that. And that is really, really, really hard because VCs aren't going to shut up about it. And the next time you have a board meeting, what are you doing about this? And how come I see this company do it and it sucks? But that's sometimes your job. Your marketing lens has to go on and say, okay, well, look, our competitors trying to do it. Here's why they're more suited to do it, or here's why they're likely to fail. But here's what our customers are saying. Here's what they actually want. Why don't we go build that? And the answer is often, well, but that's just not going to make us as much money. Sorry, but that's gravity, that's physics, that's where we are. And rarely do I see a company very successfully create out of nothing a need in a customer to solve a problem they didn't know they have. That happens. It certainly does, but it is certainly the exception and is not the rule. And it creates so many founder headaches of just broken hearts, of pouring their soul into this amazing product that does these amazing things that they are hoping people will see the magic in, as opposed to being really good at understanding what is their pain and being the best one to solve it. And then understanding that even if you're the best one to solve it, even if you have the best product, if they don't like you, they're not going to buy it. So I don't know. That I think is one of the key things, is being that person in the room that can say, guys, you can hate me for it, but this new widget that we're hoping people buy because the widget has a higher valuation to our company if we get successful at it, we're wasting our time.
So I want to say thank you so much and finish with the two questions that I'm asking every one of our guests is, what would it be if you could give yourself one advice to your younger self?
Stay at bigger companies longer. I quit two very good companies that I probably should have stayed much longer at. First was Yahoo. I stayed for 6 months. Shiny object. I'm going to be VP marketing at MediaMath, which is a hot company back then, and it was a great experience. And I definitely don't regret a second of it. And I learned a lot of lessons that carried me through to today from there. But second time was Comcast. And I think if I was giving, and this is true, a lot of scrappy young people, you're going to grow you're going to go up in title and your career path if you don't stay at the company you're at, way more than if you try to be promoted within. It's much harder to be promoted within a company than it is to get that title somewhere else. I mean, I think I'm a good example of that if you look at my LinkedIn profile. That works to a point. I think big company experience is different in the sense of, now look, I don't know that I'm learning giant marketing lessons from being there, although there are situations you just simply don't get access to unless you're at a big company, but your ceiling is so much higher. Your ability to be promoted just up and up and up. But the up part goes up many, many, many more levels in large companies. And I think this has nothing to do with marketing. It's just don't have that chip on your shoulder that I think I did in thinking that they move so slow. They're so stupid. No, I mean, yes and no. I don't think they're looking. Some part of me thinks, well, they're looking for a scrappy startup type to help, bring some energy to it. They are, but that does get annoying fast to them. And I think learning how to create success in those types of environments is its own reward and its own lesson, and has a really outsized payouts. I went and thought the best way toward wealth is to start my own company. I think I have a lot more friends who are wealthy because they were at Amazon for 8 years. That's a more sure way to do it. Talk to anybody in video right now. The person that cleans the toilets is probably worth $10 million at this point. Big companies are not that. Give them some time. And then I guess the next thing is that feeling you have when you meet with your CEO. I'm going to give you two things, and then I'll stop talking. But the feeling you have when you meet with that CEO of, do they get it? Is this a person that's just going to get it? Is this a person that if I pull off something great is going to recognize it? Or is this a person that's going to be asking for numbers all the time and headcount reductions and things like that? Please trust that instinct. It's really important. Ask them a question like, what's a company you think is doing really good marketing? And then when they say Nike or something like that, or it's probably not Nike anymore, but when they say something like that, a consumer brand, which is Apple's doing great. Okay, what's one in our space that you think is doing a good job? Listen to that answer. Really listen to that answer. So that's all I got.
For the last questions, which question did I needed to ask and I didn't?
Interesting. I mean, you're pretty good at, because you've been a founder and you've also been head of marketing. So, I think maybe you could ask, how do you give feedback to a marketing person, a CMO, a director of marketing, whatever? How do you question if they're doing a good job? Because I think a lot of them, it's kind of a binary thing. Is this person good or are they not? And I think, again, when you make the joke about the 18-month tenure that everyone does for a CMO, I often wonder, well, if it was so obvious things weren't working, what kind of feedback were they getting? Were they getting called out, or was it more like, eventually they just got sick of having this person around? Like, you as a founder, you as a CEO have, I'd say, at least 50% responsibility for whether that CMO is successful or not. The other 50% is the CMO's responsibility. But like, it's true. Like, if you don't give them the resources they need, they'll fail. If you don't give them the feedback they need, they'll fail, in your eyes at least. Like, if you don't think it's working, you need to say you don't think it's working. Don't just tell your co-founder that and then wait for a time that's convenient to let your CMO go or something. I think that happens a lot because they don't really know how to articulate how they don't know it's working. I don't really know why they don't do it. And by the way, just asking hard questions and not getting the answers you want, that's not sufficient. Like, you need to say, here's how I see the world, and that's why I asked this question. And what you're telling me is this other thing. Here's why I think it's important. Do you not think the answer to this question is important? And have that discussion. Like, you may ultimately wind up disagreeing, and that's fine. And maybe that person wasn't the right person, for that role. But you really should dig into it, as opposed to it being a binary of just like, I think this is working or I think this isn't. So that's one question. Yeah, maybe in the future you should ask of marketers or of the CEOs is like, how are you going to manage things when they're not working, or when you think they're not working, or when you're worried they're not working? What do you do?
I think it's a perfect question, and it's a great way to end this episode.
Yeah, it's
Paul,
been so much fun.
I had a great time, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.